Hey, what's up? Welcome to Offshore Audio. I'm Andrew, a live sound engineer, and this is the channel where I'm bringing you tips and tricks to mix better live events. Have you ever been to a concert with no reverb? Dreadful. That's why in this video, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know to set up effects on a digital mixer. I'm going to show you everything from connecting the input channel to the effects engine to the return channel. I'm going to show you the settings you can use and how to tweak them to get the most out of a performance. And I'm going to show you some tricks with DCAs and some other EQ things that you can do to make your effects the best possible. Before we do that, if you'd like a free 3-step guide to better EQ, then you can head to offshoreaudio.no/EQ. This is just a PDF guide, so you can have it with you even when you're at work. No need to stop and look at a YouTube video. And it just gives you the 3 steps that I use for making great EQ decisions every time. So head to the description down below and click that link to get that free guide. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. First of all, we have to ask, why and when do we apply effects to things? Quite often it's just to make something pop, or to give an idea of like space within something, or to kind of compensate for the idea that a microphone is right up against something. When you hear it in the natural environment without a microphone, you hear the room, so we try and add that back in. When to use it is kind of up to taste, but I'll tell you when not to use it, and that is without consulting the performer. You should always ask someone during a sound check, when you're checking their instrument, do you want a little bit of reverb on that, or do you take reverb on that? And maybe even ask them what type of reverb to get you started. Don't just go slapping reverb on things without asking people. So let's talk a little bit about how we apply effects, right? Because we don't really just slap reverb onto a channel. What we do in the live environment is we sort of collect the input channels that we want to affect with our effects unit, and we then send them to the effects unit, and then we have a separate channel that we use as what we call a return. And so we collect all these channels, send them into the reverb unit to get reverberated, and then that reverb unit outputs usually a stereo channel, which is stereo reverberated signals that we put in there, right? So if you take your vocal, you send it to the reverb unit, the vocal comes out of the reverb unit with reverb on it, and we can then dial in that reverb to taste. And we'll get into this concept in a little more depth in a minute. But first of all, why do we do it that way? And it's sort of because of processing power, right? There's only so many slots in our virtual effects rack that we can use. To optimize for this, we just have a couple of reverbs and we apply the same reverb to everything. It's much more efficient to have one reverb set to 2 seconds, and then everything that is a 2-second reverb gets funneled into that one reverb processor and then comes out. And it's the same for delay. You know, it's pretty unusual that you're going to have multiple different delays going on during one show. So we can capitalize on that by just using one effects unit for a delay, and then we send everything to that effects unit, and then we collect it back again and mix that collected signal in with our original. This is a universal process, right? This is how they did it in analog mixers before digital ones. They used to have external reverb units in an effects rack, literally beside your mixer, a rack of effects units, and you would take a cable and you would send your signal out of the mixer into the reverb unit over there in the rack, and then you would take another cable and you would take the output of the reverb unit back into your mixer, so you could mix that in. But mixers nowadays, they still hold on to that concept, even though, you know, there's no need to think of it that way in the digital realm. The designers can't let go of this idea of there being a separate rack of effects over there. So on every digital mixer I've ever used, you usually find an effects rack page. It's on M32s, X32s, it's on Yamaha QL and CL series mixers, it's on Midas Pro mixers, Allen and Heath mixers. All of them have this effects rack, and all of them function in the same send-return manner, sending our inputs to the reverb unit and returning the reverb signal on another channel. The only real difference with these bigger mixers is that they have more effects racks available. You can have so many reverb units, it's completely unnecessary. On that note, if you're using something like a Midas Pro X or something and you have 24 slots of effects available, let me know if you ever use them all. I would love to hear about that. So let's touch on exactly how you would do this then on your mixer. I'll just show you with one channel to begin with. First of all, we need to have a bus, and we're going to use this bus to collect all of our inputs that we want to send to the reverb. Now this might be called an auxiliary channel, might be called a mix bus, might just be called a bus, might be called an aux, whatever you want to call it. It's an additional mix that we can send all of our input channels to that we want to use on our reverb. This bus is a mix bus or an auxiliary bus, just like you would use for sending to monitors. The main difference here is that the mix will not come out of a physical XLR output on the mixer or the stage box and go into a speaker. It's going to come out of a virtual output inside the mixer and then go into an effects rack, a virtual effects rack. So the thinking process is the same with connecting to a physical object. It's just that you never actually leave the digital realm. So on your effects unit, you'll look and you can set an input somewhere, probably on the left-hand side of the screen. It will say what the input of that effects unit is, and you will be able to select a bus. In this example I'm using, I've used bus 13, right? But it could be any bus that you want. And then usually on the other side of the effects, there will be an output. That is 2 channels usually, where you return this affected signal. So where does this output of the effect go? Goes into input channels on the mixer, specifically inputs that we would call auxiliary returns, right? Or effects returns. These are channels that are not available for us to use for microphones or DI boxes or any kind of external input. They're only available for rerouting things like effects signals inside the mixer, and then we can send these channels out to the speaker system just like any of our other inputs. So this is what we call the return. It's where our original signals come back from the reverb, reverberated, and can then be mixed in with our dry signal, let's call it. That is the unaffected signal. So when we turn up these return channels, we hear the fully affected, fully reverberated sound. So once we have created a bus, I'm using 13 in this case, and we have set that bus to go into our chosen effects unit, in this case a reverb, and we have chosen the output of our reverb unit or effects unit, and we have set that to a stereo channel on the mixer. What we can do then is we can select our input channels, that is our microphones, our DI boxes, vocals, drums, these things that we are currently mixing. We select them and we can then send them onto this bus like we're sending to a monitor mix. As we send them into this bus, they will pass through the reverb and come back in on the return channel. So in that way, we govern how much reverb we want on each channel by choosing just how much of it we send to the reverb. You create a mix for your reverb unit, and that is how you govern how much reverb you hear on everything. Sometimes parts of this routing process are done automatically. For example, on a Midas M32, Behringer X32, and even on Yamaha QL mixers, I'm pretty sure, when you turn on the mixer, there are certain buses which are automatically routed into an effects unit, and effects units are automatically routed to certain return channels. But on other mixers, more complicated mixers like Midas Pro series, you quite often have to route everything yourself. You need to choose which bus is going to go into the reverb unit, and you need to choose which channel is going to hold the return signal from that reverb unit. Now there's one final really important piece of this puzzle, and that is the send to the reverb unit really needs to be post fader. If you sent it pre-fader to that reverb unit, then when you turned your vocal down, right to the bottom, you've turned that vocal off, you would still hear the echo of that vocal. So if you send it pre-fader to your reverb unit, you're going to end up turning your vocal down and then thinking, why do I still hear the vocal except in a cave? So remember, post-fader send from your channels to your bus, which is then going to your reverb unit. Let's talk a little bit about settings. For a vocal reverb, I like to start with a hall reverb. Lots of different types of effects that you can choose. I like the sound of a hall, and I like to start at 2 seconds. That is a 2-second length of the reverb, that's how long it reverberates for. And I like to dial the size down a little bit from the default on the M32 anyway. Now this does not fit all situations, so here's a couple of other recommendations for you. If there are really short, sharp vocals, that's not long, not elongated, going up and down, no Mariah Carey stuff going on here. We're talking more like, let's think, like maybe Rage Against the Machine, let's talk about that. You want to shorten that reverb even more. So I was on 2, I might bring that down to like 1.5 seconds, because the short reverb works with the short vocals. You don't want to have a short vocal and then this insane decay time. There's a bit of dissonance there. Similarly, if you do end up with Mariah Carey on the stage with these long vocals and notes going up and down and on forever, then you might want to consider elongating that reverb. Take the reverb time, push it up to 2.5 seconds, even 3 seconds on that hall reverb can suit the vocal depending on what it's doing. Now let's talk about delays. There's kind of two main styles that I go for, and I won't usually have both active in one show. It will depend on the show. The first one is a tap delay, and I will go into that delay and I'll just make sure that the feedback time is set to about 25 to 30%. And then there's usually a control on the mixer automatically linked to the delay time, or you can link it to the delay time. And what happens then is you just tap that in time with the music and it will set a delay time which is in time with the music that's being played. And then you get a chance to turn that up a little bit and it can elongate those long vocals even more or give a kind of cool effect. The second type of delay that I'll go for is a slapback, sort of Elvis 50s recording style. And if you end up with any kind of country or that kind of stuff getting played in front of you, this can be really great. And that's super easy. You just turn the feedback to 0. You want 0 feedback on that kind of thing, or at least very low feedback. And then the delay time I will fix independent from the tempo of the song to about 100 milliseconds. And I might go up or down depending on how things are sounding, but I'll start off there. So let's get into some final tips that I can give you to fine tune these effects and make them sound as good as they possibly can be. The first one is EQ on your effects returns. Remember I said before that the bus goes to the reverb unit and then the reverb unit returns onto a couple of input channels. Find those input channels, turn on the EQ, and then I like to engage a high pass and a low pass filter, bring them in to take the top and the bottom off of that return. I don't know why, if it's just the quality of digital reverbs that you find in a lot of mixers, but I find that this softens the edges and really lets that reverb blend into the music without taking up any unnecessary space. My second tip is use more than one reverb. Get your perfect reverb dialed in for the vocals, but then use a separate one for your instruments, for your drums, for example, or for a saxophone if someone's using it, or a violin. Hint, all these instruments love reverb. But maybe try a chamber or a room or a plate, or just try a different style of reverb to give a little bit of sonic difference, but also so that you can really nail that vocal reverb. 3, try combining that tap delay with those longer reverbs that I mentioned earlier. It goes together really, really well. So when you have a chorus with really long, powerful vocals, try just bringing up that delay along with the reverb and then seeing how that all sounds when it sits together. And my fourth and final tip then is set DCAs to control the returns, so the masters of your effects units. Have one for that delay and one for that vocal reverb. That way, when someone stops playing and starts speaking, you can quickly mute the reverb or the delay that was on their voice and hear them speaking clearly, and you can quickly turn it back on again when they start playing again. Also, when it comes to the choruses, you then have this master available on your mixer, and you can push that up or pull that down depending on the intensity of the song. Quiet song, bring it down. Loud song, bring it up. Chorus, get that right up there, like really push it. Get that reverb to the roof during the chorus and see, is it ridiculous? Give it a try. When you come in and you set up your system and you test that everything works, take your talkback mic, send it out the main PA, and then send it to the reverb and use your voice and that talkback mic to get your reverb in a good position before the show starts. If you'd like to know more about setting up sound systems, I've got a video that I'll link to up there. And if you want to know a little bit more about how I set up mixers for mixing bands, I'll leave a video up there. For now, thank you so much for watching. Please like the video if it was useful to you, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.